Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching what I would like to believe is the end of an era. And I want to talk to you today about this. I think it's a very fascinating topic to delve into, and it's perfect and ripe for the particular season we're in with Gacha Gaming. If you are like me, and I'm pretty sure you are, many of you are, you weren't a Gacha addict before Genshin Impact, and you weren't even a Gacha player before Genshin Impact. That was the first game you got into. The game was so monumentally massive because of the pandemic, and that it was also a fresh game in the space that it brought in a heaping amount of players outside of the Gacha space. Normies, people from different respective niches, so on and so forth. And the good thing about that experience when it happened is that that was also the very first time a lot of people got to play a Gacha game. And talk all the shit you will about Gacha games, there are some very fun aspects about them. And those fun aspects were overwhelmingly positive for a fresh experience, right? We had our V cards like basically cracked with this game. And so the hype, the FOMO, the oohs and ahs, you know, when you play a Gacha game at launch, its climax, it's what do you call it? Honeymoon phase is incredibly powerful. So when you play a Gacha game for the first time, it's infinitely more powerful than you would think. But basically this happened and people fell in love with these games, and it allowed them to basically have kind of like a tunnel vision for ignoring the predatory practices, the alarming problems of what comes with playing a Gacha game. And you were able to get away with these garbage practices as a developer because there also wasn't any other games to compare, to reference in the mainstream space, especially to noobs who don't know anything about Gacha games. You were able to get away with this, basically. But then what happens? Time starts to go by and these issues start to become more apparent and alarming, and players start complaining and they start looking for another game in that respective niche to play, because at that time, it's not oversaturated. It's not a fragmentation at the point in time, right? So then Honkai Star Rail comes out, and that becomes the next cope for playing a Gacha game that isn't Genshin Impact. That's going to be better. It's going to be different. But then you realize you're playing two Gacha games now that both have 50-50 systems, right? So that same wallet is now having to spend just a little bit more money, even if they aren't spending as much money on one individual game. You combine what they're spending on two games, and it's increasing, and everybody has a budget. Everybody only has so much money that they can spend on one individual Gacha game, let alone 2, 3, or 4. So what happens is the space has to increase in volume and popularity, because if it doesn't, well, then you just have the same players spending the same money from their wallets. That's only going to carry you so far, right? And so what happens after this? Wuthering Waves comes out. The real Genshin killer. At least that's what they were being marketed as, whether they wanted to or not. More players start playing that game. Some of them leave Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail to play this game. Some of them stay there. Others start playing 3 different Gacha games at once. But regardless, a lot of players aren't coming into the space the way they did when the pandemic announced Genshin Impact. It's kind of just the same players circulating around and trying different Gacha games. Well, this particular dynamic and pathing continues to happen, but it speeds up rapidly as we know it. We know how this story goes. More and more Gacha games start coming out. You got Chaos Zero Nightmare. You got Love in Deep Space. You've got Arknight's Infield. You got Neverness to Everness. You've got many other Gacha, Nike, Goddess of Victory, Girls Frontline 2, Exilium. All of these Gacha games start coming out, but a lot of them are still doing 50-50 systems. Chaos Zero Nightmare did the 50-50 system. Girls Frontline 2 Exilium did it. You've got Uma Musume. You've got Star Savior, which aren't even 50-50s. They might even be worse because you can keep pulling until you just hopefully get the character. But one thing that's for certain is the Gacha space as a whole is not actually expanding. And if it is, it isn't enough to compensate for that fragmentation and oversaturation of rapid Gacha games releasing with these 50-50 systems. And so what's one thing we learned as time goes by? I remember in the beginning, I tried to tell people so much about these predatory practices and how much money you're actually spending on these games is ludicrous, that these companies are making too much money, and it was falling on so many deaf ears. But you speed up today and people now understand that phenomenon, that problem over glaring, it's a glaring problem because they're starting to play all these different Gacha games. Some of them are trying to manage multiples at once, and they're spending so much money. Why? One of the reasons, because of the 50-50 system. Losing it means spending a lot more money than you're comfortable with spending. And nobody wants to feel like they lost trying to acquire a character. Spending money to acquire a character in and of itself is a fool's errand. It's foolish, but it's also a part of the Gacha culture. And that's a battle I gave up on a long time ago. However, If you could choose to have a 50-50 system or not have a 50-50 system, most would say F the 50-50 system. Well, now we're living in a gacha space where developers are competing for your time and your money because the gacha space isn't increasing in volume enough to overcompensate for oversaturation and fragmentation. And when those two variables compound on top of each other, now you get a very competitive market where the future gacha games now have to give you better incentives, better monetary incentives and practices for free-to-play friendly games and dynamics, so that you want to try their game and potentially leave the game you're playing or try to squeeze in their game with the game you're playing. And here lies the problem. Here comes the end of an era. Because this is becoming a over-glaring problem for developers and publishers, they now are forced naturally to make their games way more accessible and free-to-play friendly than the ones you're currently playing. And this is where things get interesting, because the first game to really make that power move was Neverness to Everness, not a PvP, and that's very important because Epic 7 and Summoner's War and Etheria Restart, people will try and say those games have guaranteed no 50-50s. That doesn't matter because they're PvP, and if they didn't make their game a guaranteed rate up, people would just quit them because who the hell wants to play a PvP game where you're gambling on getting characters that are meta? Nobody wants to do that, not in a PvP game. But when a single player game comes along and says, we're doing no 50-50, we're not doing it, we're giving up on that, we'll get it, or get our bag by various means such as cosmetics and such, but we are done with the 50-50 system. That is a huge power move by that particular developer that's also going to ripple and affect future gacha games and pre-existing gacha games. And it's the first step to going in the right direction truly, especially when you consider fragmentation and oversaturation, right? Now we're in a space where when a game starts to drop, the first thing people question is there a 50-50 system? People have become so overly sensitive to the 50-50 system that they won't even touch the game if it's a 50-50. If it's officially confirmed 50-50, oh, not playing it. Some people right now are jumping to conclusions on rumors, and it's not even confirmed yet by the devs of Silver Palace if there actually is a 50-50 or if it's Arknight's infill, whatever. But people are so sensitive to it, like, nope, I'm out. And I think this was the natural pathing of what has transpired in the gacha space, right? But getting back to NTE, the best thing that people can do by saying you don't want a 50-50 is support games with no 50-50s in the space. This is very common logic. It's not like you need a rocket science degree to understand this phenomenon. If you doom post NTE, well, then you're also telling the developers, future gacha game developers, we don't care if you even put no 50-50 in your game, we're still going to doom post it. So why would I remove my 50-50? I mean, NTE did it, they still hated on the game. Let's just go proceed with the 50-50 because they're playing Wuthering Waves, they're playing Arknight's Infill, they're playing Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rails, Endless on Zero. All those games have 50-50s and they're making a heaping amount of money off of these guys. So clearly getting rid of the 50-50 isn't the issue. You see where I'm going? Silver Palace is another game coming into the mainstream space and all eyes are on its gacha system. This is good. This is wonderful. Because what y'all are going to do is you're going to compare it to Neverness to Everness. That's what you should do. You compare it to the best market contender in the mainstream space, and that's Neverness to Everness for a free-to-play, consumer-friendly experience. By doing that, you are now forcing another mainstream space game to have to confine to that principle, because if they don't, it's going to be a massive market capture loss. And on top of that, just recently, Chasing Collider Rider, another upcoming gacha game that's not PvP, that's important, just announced no 50-50, and they're adding limited banners into the standard banner upon their banners expiring. This is, again, in the right direction. Another game people need to support. It's important you support these games because that's how you tell future developers, we don't want 50-50s in our games. But them on top of NTE doing this, not only is it going to put pressure on future gacha games, it's going to put pressure on pre-existing gacha games too. Because what's going to happen is people who are playing these current gacha games are going to go, hey, hold on now. Why aren't you guys doing this? Why couldn't y'all have added these limited characters into the standard banner? Why do you still have to do this 50-50? You're making plenty of money. This is an overall net positive for the gacha space. And this is why I said this is potentially entering the end of an era, and that era is the 50-50 era. Now, do I think that Wuthering Waves and Hoyoverse and current pre-existing market captures are going to die upon all of this happening? No, but it is going to take away and trickle away from their audience. There's going to be a lot of players that are going to stay because they're loyal and they have sunk cost fallacy and they just love the game so much, and that's okay. But there's going to be players who are playing and they're like, you know what, I'm out, man. These other games are just way more free-to-play friendly, way more accessible. And as I said before, I only have so much money in my wallet. I only have so much time for free time for playing video games. And me trying to keep up with this very expensive game where a big part of my enjoyment is character collection, it's too expensive. I can't afford it. Why would I spend $150 to just acquire a character absent of their weapon when I can go to this game over here and spend $75 and get the character and their weapon? You see what I'm saying? It's very common sense. At the end of the day, I think we are naturally going in that direction, but it's important that the consumer remains conscious of these games and the monetary incentives that they're doing. I think it's great that people scrutinize Silver Palace in future games in terms of whether they're doing 50-50s, so on and so forth. This is not to say that a 50-50 system cannot work anymore. I do understand how resource acquisition works. And there's games with 50-50, like Chaos Zero Nightmare. I haven't played it in a while, but it was a game with a 50-50 system, but you were pretty much able to gather every character because of how much resources they were giving you on a patch-to-patch basis. I understand that phenomenon, but at the end of the day, guys, a 50-50 system feels like shit when you lose, and it often helps the house make more money. That's just the reality of it, and that's why they do it. The house wins, and when it comes to gambling, all the time. That's going to be the topic of this video for today. You guys comment down below. Let me know what you think. Silver Palace beta is going to be dropping later on today, and we'll be able to have our definitive, proof of its gacha system. So we'll see what goes on with that. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.